Good morning, and I welcome you all to the 6th day of the 98th Annual Conference of the Music Academy Madras. This morning, the prayer is sung by Snigdha Desi Raju and Shrutika KR of the second year of the Advanced School of Carnatic Music. They will be rendering a composition of Irayamman Thampi in Asaveri.
ಎಂತಹೋ ವಲ್ಲಭ ಇನ್ನೇರಂ ಮೌನ ಭಾವಂ ಎಂತಹೋ ವಲ್ಲಭ ಇನ್ನೇರಂ ಮೌನ ಭಾವಂ ಎಂತಹೋ ವಲ್ಲಭ ಇನ್ನೇರಂ ಮೌನ ಭಾವಂ ಎಂತ ಪರಾಧಂ ചെയ്തു ഞാൻ ಎಂತಹೋ വല്ലഭ ഇന്നേരം മൗനഭാവം എന്ത പരാധം ചെയ്തു ഞാൻ ಎಂತಹೋ വല്ലഭ ജന്ത സായക സന്താപത്തോട് ജന്ത സായക സന്താപത്തോട് കാന്ത ഉപാന്തേ വന്നു കാന്ത ഞാനും ഉപാന്തേ വന്നു ಎಂತಹೋ വല്ലഭ ಇನ್ನೇರಂ മൗന ഭാവം ಎಂತ പരാധം ചെയ്തു ഞാൻ ಎಂತಹೋ വല്ലഭ മല്ലി ഗന്ധവും മന്ദപവനം താനും മല്ലി ഗന്ധവും മന്ദപവനം താനും ചൊല്ലാർന്ന ചന്ദ്രശോഭയും ചൊല്ലാർന്ന ചന്ദ്രശോഭയും നല്ല സമയമിത് മുല്ല ശരണും ദയത്തിലും അകതളിരില്ല ഇത് പൊഴുതും നല്ല സമയമിത് മുല്ല ശരണും வல்லப இந்நேரம் மௌன பாவம் எந்த பராதம் செய்து ஞான் எந்த பராதம் செய்து
Thank you. The morning's presentation is by Dr. Arathi Rao, an honors diploma holder in systems management and MSc in mathematics, holding a Vidvat degree in Carnatic music from the Government of Karnataka and an MA in music from the University of Madras. Dr. Arathi Rao's dissertation titled Vijayanagara as a Seat of Music obtained for her a PhD from the University of Mysore. A dedicated researcher who has contributed numerous articles and papers, Dr. Arathi Rao has worked on research projects concerning Suladi musical notations of the Tanjavur Maharaja Sarfoji Saraswati Mahal Library, and she is continuing with her study on the manuscript musical notations of other types of compositions of the past. Presently a faculty member at the Jain University, Bangalore, Dr. Arathi Rao has developed modules in Indian music for postgraduate Pathshala projects of the University Grants Commission, Ministry of Human Resources, Government of India. In 2019, Dr. Arathi Rao received the Musicologist Award from the Music Academy, Madras. Over to you, Dr. Rao, 45 minutes.
Thank you very much. My namaskarams to all the senior musicians, musicologists, students, Vidwans, Rasikas, Vidushis, and to Mr. Sriram and Mr. T.M. Krishna. First of all, I would like to thank the Music Academy for inviting me to present my lecture today. When I learned that the theme of the conference this year was on ragas, the first thought that came to me was to present something on ālāpa and ṭhāya, because I have been looking at ālāpa and ṭhāya notations for the last few years. But I was trying to understand ālāpa ṭhāya from just by looking at the manuscripts for some time now, and I thought, is there something new that we can think about it? First of all, where did this come from? ālāpa and ṭhāya are two musical forms which we see in the 17th century. They have been documented by Venkatamaki and his father, Govinda Dikshita. But was there an inheritance from an earlier musical form? And is there a legacy of the ālāpa and ṭhāya in today's music? So I'd like to examine the ālāpa and ṭhāya from that perspective today in my lecture today. So first of all, I'll give a very quick introduction to what ālāpa and ṭhāya are, and then I'll go back a little bit in time and look at what was happening prior to the 17th century and what were the raga expository forms. I'm focusing only on the forms of raga exposition and those which don't have lyrics and not bound by tala. I'm not going to look at other songs or other musical forms. So with that, I would like to start my lecture. So first of all, as I mentioned, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to, as I said, give an overview of what ālāpa and ṭhāya are, and then talk about what came before them, and then take up a case study of an ālāpa and ṭhāya from Tanjavur manuscripts, then try to examine what we can see from those notations, the manuscript notations, and then also very briefly talk about whether we can trace any of these features in present-day music. So the focus of the presentation, this is a disclaimer I'm going to make right at the beginning, that it is not about raga lakshanas, it is about the musical form, because raga lakshanas have changed drastically from those days to the present day. So I don't want to go into whether Bhupala sounds the same now or it sounded different in the time of Venkatamaki and so on. So that is the focus. And first of all, when we say raga, raga is said to be the musical mode of Indian music. So what is a musical mode? It is defined as a non-equidistant scale of at least 3 pitches. And there is a hierarchy of pitch relationships. There are some pitches more important, some less important, and so on. And there are many other refinements, such as there could be subsidiary pitches, there could be rhythmic considerations, cadential formulas. All these English terms, what do they mean? They mean things like kala pramana, they mean things like anuswara, they mean things like vadi samvadi, and so on. So we have these concepts when we talk about raga. So when we study how the raga exposition happens, these are all very important factors. Of course, from notations, many of these features are not captured. But when we try to compare Lakshana with the notations, we could probably get a sense of how it was all, how it was all being presented. So first of all, I'd like to very quickly talk about how raga has evolved in Indian music. I think Dr. Premlata has given an extensive talk on the Grama Raga system and the Jati system that came before that. So I'm not going to spend much time on it. But initially, we had the Grama Jati system in Bharata and Dattila's time, the Gandharva system. And then we slowly had the Grama Ragas coming in the Kudumya Malay inscriptions. And later in Brihadeshi, we see a lot of descriptions of the Grama Ragas. And then we have Bhashas also. And slowly, as we come towards the 13th century, in the Sangita Ratnakara, we not only have descriptions of the so-called Marga Ragas, which are nothing but the Grama Ragas, Bhashas, Ragas, Mebhashas, Antarbhashas, etc. But we have a new system of Deshi Ragas coming in. And Sharangadeva, the author of Sangita Ratnakara, whose ambition is to cover all the music before him and all the music at his time. So he says he's Nishanka, he's without doubts. I keep saying that he is absolutely without doubts, but when we read, we get a lot of doubts. So we are all full of Shanka when we read it. But he has tried to document all the music before his time and all the music of his time. So that is the Marga Deshi Raga system, which he has written about. And then we have, later on, there are a lot of developments in the Deshi Ragas. We have the Mela system coming in. And when we come to the 16th century, we have the Mela system, and after that, in the 17th century, we have Sangeeta Sudha and Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika, which talk about the ālāpa and ṭhāya. So that is going to be the focus of my presentation. Then, of course, we have the modern period. So we are only going to look at certain musical forms for which we have some information or notation. And first of all, I'm going to look at the Grama Raga Bhasha related musical forms, which are ālāpa, rūpaka, which have been documented in Bharata Bhashyam, and ālāpa Karana Vartini, which have been documented in Sangita Ratnakara. There is another musical form called Akshiptika, which I'm not taking because it has lyrics. So I thought I would focus only on non-lyrical forms. And now this ālāpa is very different from the ālāpa that comes later, which is described by Venkatamaki, though the name is same. One of the difficulties that we have when we study historical Indian music is we have similar terms in different periods which mean different things. So that is one of the problems. And after this, when we come to the Sangita Ratnakara, he writes about something called raga ālapti. And apart from talking about Grama Ragas and ālāpas of Grama Ragas, and other songs like Rupakas, he also talks about ālapti. Then in the Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika and Sangeeta Sudha of the 17th century, Govinda Dikshita and Venkatamaki talk about ālāpa and ṭhāya. So they both talk about the general features of ālāpas and ṭhāyas. Govinda Dikshita additionally gives the rules for ālāpas in 50 ragas. So he actually says that you have to start from this swara, you have to go up to this swara, you have to come down to this swara, and this is how this section ends. So such detailed descriptions have been given. So using those, we can try to look at the notations and see how much of a correlation is there. Then, of course, when we come to the modern period, we have many modern authors who have talked about how ālāpana should be done. we have to also think about whether that is tallying with what we are actually doing in concerts today. Okay, so I'd just like to give an overview of all the prior research that has happened in this area earlier. There was a book called Raga, ālāpana and Ṭhāyams that was published by K. Vasudeva Shastri in 1958. I think it was a pioneering attempt because for the first time, he has taken many notations from the Tanjore library and published them. But there are certain issues like, the source of the manuscripts has not been mentioned, and also there has been some editing that has happened, like he has put markers for Madras ṭhāya and Taras ṭhāya, but we do not know what was the rationale employed for that kind of editing. I mean, I wish we had more information about these things that would help us to read the notations better. Then, of course, there was a pioneering work of Dr. Sita in Tanjore as a seat of music, which was spelled as Tanjore those days. And she has documented a whole lot of notations that are present in the Saraswati Mahal library. So that has become a rich repository for people like us to refer to know how many manuscripts are there. And she also talks about the various musical forms and the lakshana of that period. Then Professor R. Satyanarayana's Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika is the critically edited version of Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika published by the IGNCA is also like a magnum opus because you have so much information about the music of that period and the music before that also. He has given extensive critical observations on all these musical forms. Then Dr. V. Premlata has given a lecture at the Music Academy on a manuscript which contained Caturdaṇḍī notations from Kerala. And I have also given a lecture in 2015. I had covered ālāpa and ṭhāya to some detail, but though not extensively. And then I have also carried out a project on manuscript song notations, which included ālāpa and ṭhāya. And then I think in 2022, Dr. Premlata gave a lecture on understanding ṭhāya, understanding ṭhāyams themselves through notations. And that was a very extensive lecture where she talked about the features of the notations, how the swaras are staccato, and so on. So it was, I'll be referring to that lecture because a lot of things which she has already said, I don't want to repeat. So now let's go back to the Grama-raga Bhasha stage. So we have something called ālāpa. I tried to reproduce a notation here, but I'm not going to attempt to sing it because it comes with its difficulties. Some of those symbols, for example, the dots, we are used to looking at the dots above the swaras and thinking of them as Taras ṭhāya, but it is actually the opposite. The dots above represent Madras ṭhāya and the dashes represent something else. So I don't want to get into that now. And also the swaras themselves, we don't know how exactly they sounded. This is supposed to be an ālāpa from the Grama-raga Shuddha Sadharita, documented in the Sangita Ratnakara. And above I have given the lakshanas of Shuddha Sadharita. It is connected to a jati, and there are certain swaras which are defined as Tara. Tara Shadja is a graha and amsha. And there are some weak notes. Then there is a nyasa. I'm going to talk about all of these features, what they mean in different periods of time. So this is just an example of how raga lakshana is given and how an ālāpa for that is given. One thing that we can notice is it's a very short composition. It's a very short notation, and it does not seem to have sections. It's not like an elaborate section where you start with something, introduce, and then you slowly build up phrases and so on. So that is all there is. So this Grama-raga ālāpa was only meant to showcase the lakshana of the raga. It's almost like the raga lakshanam phrases that you see in SSP in the beginning, almost like that. So it was not a very elaborate composition, and it was not like a detailed exposition of the raga as such. Then in the Sangita Ratnakara, as I said, we not only have the ālāpas and rupakas, we also have the Deshi ragas and the related musical forms. So when we come to Deshi ragas, we have Raganga, Bhashanga, Kriyanga, and Upanga, as we all know. And there is a linkage of these to the earlier Marga ragas. That is, even in Brihadeshi, there is a linkage of the Marga ragas to Jatis. And Sangita Ratnakara links the Deshi ragas to the Marga ragas, which are linked to the Jatis. So there is a whole connection that is established, right from the Jati system up to the Deshi raga system. So while we have the Marga Raga forms of ālāpa, rupaka, etc., we also have the raga ālapti for Deshi ragas. Now, what is this raga ālapti? Raga ālapti is an improvisatory form, as opposed to the ālāpa of Grama Raga, which we saw just now. Raga ālapti is an elaborate form where you have different stages of raga exposition. So, first of all, there are 4 swasthanas. What are these 4 swasthanas? They are 4 stages of raga development. And they are defined by the boundaries of swaras. If you start from a base note, that is called as ṭhāya swara. Then you have the 4th note from it, which is called a dvayartha swara. Then the 8th note from the base note is the dviguna swara. So from the base note to the dvayartha swara is the first swasthana. And that does not include the dvayartha swara. It's like you are going from sa to pa but not touching pa. You are singing sancharas without touching pa and coming back. Then you sing swaras from the first note to the dvayartha swara, including the dvayartha swara. That is the second swasthana. Then you sing swaras which are touching the region between the dvayartha swara and the dviguna swara. That is the third swasthana. Then you come to the 4th stage where you are including the 8th note, the dviguna swara. That is the final stage. Now, if you think of this kind of exposition, it is almost like it is recursive. You go up to a 4th note, come back. You go up to the, you touch the 4th note, come back. Then you go to the 8th note, you just touch a note below it, then you come back. So this kind of a recursive graph we can draw just to represent how the ālāpa is. So of course, one thing is that there is a slight difference of opinion between 2 commentators of Sharngadeva on the 3rd swasthana. Kallinatha and Simha Bhupala are 2 commentators of Sharngadeva. Simha Bhupala says, don't come back to this ṭhāya, just stay there. And Kallinatha says, come back to this ṭhāya. So these are the 2 opinions. But assuming that Kallinatha is right, we have this kind of a structure. One thing is, we can think about how an ālāpa exactly was. Do we have notations for it? Can we try to reconstruct it? We don't have notations for the ālāpa, just like we have ālāpa notations, because ālāpa was more improvisatory. At best, what we can do is we can look at the Vadana Krama of instruments, which is given in the instruments chapter in Sangeeta Ratnakara. There, they don't have notations, but they have templates. There, you have rules like, for this raga, you have to go up to this swara, and then sing some gamakas there, then go to another swara, sing some gamakas and come back. So that kind of reconstruction can be attempted. But Vadana Krama and Raga Ālāpa, trying to correlate them, there are some problems. So it is not very straightforward. So I don't want to go into that now. But I just wanted to share that the Vadana Krama is a kind of documentation which will help us to understand ālāpa in a way. Then we have looked at the structure of the Grama Raga, ālāpa, rupaka and other melodies, and we have looked at the ālāpa. But functionally, what does it mean? What do these swaras mean? We have looked at terms like graha, amsha, nyasa, alpatva, bahutva and so on. But we know the definitions. We have been studying the definitions for a long time. We know that graha is the starting swara, nyasa is the ending swara, amsha is the important swara, and alpatva is when a swara is used less, and bahutva is when it's used profusely. And we also know that vadi and samvadi stand for, the vadi swara is the important swara, which is the same as the amsha swara, and the samvadi is a consonant swara for that. But how does it actually play out when we look at the raga lakshanas? There are certain observations that we can make. One is that in the jati system, for the jatis, every jati could have more than one amsha swara. That is one thing. And the other thing is that the amsha and the nyasa could be different. So, see, when the nyasa is different, it means that, in fact, the nyasa was the characteristic identifier of the jati. So, when the nyasa is different, it means that the melody can come to rest at some swara which is not the prominent or amsha swara. So, that was one thing that was there. But later on, when we come to the Sangeeta Ratnakara period, I mean, the later Grama Ragas and the early Deshi Ragas, the amsha and the nyasa could be the same. So that is one change that happens. And the Sharngadeva defines Amsha as a prominent swara which gives delight, which is a very characteristic swara. And another function of the Amsha swara, which was there earlier also, was that it was defining the boundaries of how high you can go and how low you can go. In the earlier period, before Sharngadeva, it was defined as you can go up to 4 or 5 swaras above the Amsha to get to the Tara limit. And you can go 1 octave below the Amsha to get to the Mandra limit. So totally you have a range of about 1.5 octaves. But in the Sangeeta Ratnakara, Sharngadeva increases the limit by 1 more octave. He says that Amsha is in the Madhyasthai, then you have a Tarasthai Amsha also, and above that you can have another 4 notes. So effectively we have 2.5 octaves. So that is one thing that we see. And then I think this increase in the range of octaves continues further into Sangeeta Sudha and other texts of the early modern period, as we shall see. And in fact, in the notations, I almost noticed that it is more than even what Govinda Dikshita is saying, if we reconstruct it according to the melodic flow. So these are some of the things that we can observe in these characteristic features. And also I feel that the whole connotation of Graha, Amsha, Nyasa changed in the Deshi period. It did not mean what it meant in the Gandharva period. So let's try to understand this a little more. So I come back to the Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa, and I would like to give an introduction to how exactly the various sections are. So first of all, we have 4 stages. The first stage is the introduction. The second stage is the elaboration. The third is the stepwise build-up. And the 4th stage is the conclusion. So in the introduction stage, we have something called an akshiptika. It is also called aitam colloquially in the notations. In the elaboration stage, we have something called a ragavardhini. So ragavardhini can be more than one. You can have multiple ragavardhanis. And each ragavardhani ends with its own short muktai section. It is called Vidari. And the stepwise build-up is something called the ṭhāya section. Now we can have more than one ṭhāya section. And exactly what a ṭhāya section is that you take a bass note and you start building phrases from there. Venkatamaki calls it tanas. So tana is nothing to do with arthanam. It is just melodic phrases. So you take a bass note, then you build phrases around it, touching a particular note. So for example, you take the bass note as sa, then you can first build phrases touching re, then the next stage is go up to ga, then go up to ma, and so on. So you can cover all the notes of the raga that way. And then in the descending order, you repeat the same thing. So this is the ṭhāya section. So in a raga, how many ṭhāya sections you can have depending on how many bass notes you can have. So Venkatamaki says you can take everything as the bass note. You can start from re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, whichever notes are there. But actually, when we look at the notations and when we look at the Lakshana given by Govinda Dikshita, there aren't so many sthayis. There are only 3 or 4. So depending on where you start from, you can build tanas 4 or 5 notes above it. And the vartani is melodic elaboration that is done just before the conclusion. So these are the stages. Now, the ṭhāya section, I just explained to you what it is that you have to build up tanas. The rule is that when you are building up tanas in a particular swara, you don't go above it when you are in the ascending order. When you are coming down in the descending order, when you are, for example, if you are starting from Tara Shajja and you are singing tanas up to Gandhara, then you cannot go below the Gandhara when you are coming in the descending order. So this is the rule of the ṭhāya. And we look at descriptions of ālāpa in Sangeeta Sudha. As I mentioned, ālāpas for 50 ragas have been given. And for every raga, for every section, that is starting with Akshiptika, Ragavardhini, he gives the starting swara, the highest point that you can go to, and the ending swara. And then he says that, sometimes he says, in the end, when you have the Muktai section, it should be just like the Vidari. So all the rules that are specified for the Vidari are valid for this. So, and one more thing, interesting feature that we notice in the Sangeeta Sudha is, just before the ālāpa, he gives the Raga Lakshana. And in the Raga Lakshana, he specifies Graha, Amsha, Nyasa. And the graha is not shadja in some cases. And in some cases, it is shadja. So Mrs. Hema Ramanathan has explained this point that the word graha can mean two things. One is the starting point of the scale, or it can mean the starting point of the melody. So it is sometimes used in the second sense, that it is the starting point of the scale, not the melody. So it could be either of those two. So that is why we have a confusion if we just look at the raga lakshana and we try to imagine how the raga is. If it says daivata graha or madhyama graha or something, we find it difficult to correlate to that. So when we look at the structure of sthāyi alone, I'm not talking about the other sections, it is also recursive, but it is recursive in both directions, like a standing wave. So in raga ālāpa, it was recursive in one direction. But in raga ālāpa, you had only one sthāyi swara. Here you can have multiple sthāyi swaras, depending on how many bass notes you can take in that raga. And what I actually found is that usually the sthāyi swaras will be shadja, panchama, tara shadja, panchama, and madhya panchama, and and madhya shadja is always there. And in addition, sometimes you can have a madhyama or a gandhara or a rishabha. Gandhara and rishabha are very rare. You can have more madhyama occurrences as a bass note. So the sthāyi section will be called panchama sthāyi or tara shadja sthāyi or shadja sthāyi. What it means is that tara shadja is the bass note or panchama is the bass note. So I did not find any ragas where the nishada and the daivata have been specified as the bass notes. I think it is, the reason could be if you take a very high point as a bass note, you have to go very high in the octave. So those two were not there in the Sangeeta Sudha descriptions. I have, of course, not all notations I have examined. I cannot claim that all the Tanjavur notations that I have seen, I have examined in detail for this aspect. But if you look at the descriptions in Sangeeta Sudha, it does not have the description for Daivata Sthāyi and Nishada Sthāyi. So that is one thing that we observe. And what is the octave range totally? Because every ālāpa starts either on Tara Sthāyi or Madhya Sthāyi. And if it starts on Madhya Sthāyi, then and it ends on Tara Daivata or Tara Nishada, depending on how the raga is. If the Nishada is not there in the raga, it will end on the Tara Daivata. So totally the range is about 1.5 or 1 3/4 of an octave. But as I said, when we look at the notation, sometimes we see that the melodic flow seems to go into the mandra sthāyi also. Because you can always argue this is not the way to reconstruct the melody. But going by the flow, it appears like that. And also, every ālāpa ends on shadja. So I was trying to ask myself, what is the point in having a nyasa swara specified? What is the meaning of nyasa swara? If you are always going to end on shadja, what does nyasa mean? In fact, if we think about it, in today's music also we always end on shadja. Even if the melody doesn't end, if the kriti doesn't, first of all we end on the pallavi. And if it doesn't end on the shadja, we bring it to shadja and we come to a close. So this is something which we have to think about. Then I would like to take up a case study of an ālāpa in Malahari. This ālāpa is, a notation has something called daivata graham. Now, daivata graham, as I explained, is that daivata is supposed to be the graha swara. This seems to be a legacy from an earlier period when shadja was not the tonic swara, from the Sangeeta Ratnakara period, which in Sangeeta Sudha things had changed and actually shadja was the tonic for everything. But the notation doesn't reflect that. And even Sangeeta Sudha says that daivata is the graha. So notation is faithfully reflecting Sangeeta Sudha. And rather, I was talking about it with Dr. Srilata, and she said, I think Sangeeta Sudha is reflecting the notation. So which we don't know which came first, but that is the thing. So, so if we look at how many sections do we have in the notation for the ālāpa, do we have the same number of sections that are specified in the Lakshana of Sangeeta Sudha? We see that the actual number of sections is a little less. So we do not have, for example, sthāyi sections for all the swaras. We have a Tara Shadja sthāyi followed by a Muktai. And we have tanas which are not enough in number as compared to the tanas which have been specified in Sangita Sudha. Sangita Sudha says you should have 10 tanas, but here we have only 6. And we also find the usage of the local colloquial terms like Yedupu and Udgraham and Muktai instead of Nyasa and so on. So this is one feature that we see in the notations. In fact, we don't even find the word akshiptika or ālāpa. We find only aitam. So we identify the ālāpa notation by the word aitam. And sometimes even that is not there. It starts with an unnamed section and it just says Bhairavi and the notation starts off. Then we realize, you look at the subsequent sections, we realize that it is an ālāpa. So I'd like to just play a few. So the Lakshana says that you start from the Rishabha of the Tarasthai and then you go up to Tara Madhyama and then come down to the Madhya Rishabha and then Tara Shajja. That's where you end. So this section, when I try to play what was the notation in the Tanjavur manuscript, it more or less conformed to that. Sometimes we find that the starting swara is not what is given in the Lakshana, but the ending swara is adhered to. So they come back and rest on the point which has been specified in the Lakshana. It goes up to the. So it comes to rest on Madhya Shajja. So that is as per the rule. Then this is the concluding section. That was the introductory part, the Akshiptika, Ragavardhini and the Vidari. There are more Ragavardhinis, but I won't be playing them. I'd like to take up this Ṭhāya section, which according to me is the most interesting section. So the first step is this. So first we start from Tara Shajja and we go up to Rishabha and come to a close. So we've gone up to the Madhyama. Okay. One thing that I'd like to mention here is in Dr. Premlata's lecture, if anyone remembers, she was talking about most of the tanas ending on a common ending phrase. It is true of many notations that I have seen also, but I have also seen notations where that common phrase is not there. So I think that you can have two ways of ending those tanas. One is, have a kind of a motif which is repeating. You always end with that phrase, or you can come to the ending swara in any other manner also. I think it is similar to what we do now. Some people prefer the motif related development. You have a common motif and then you build upon that. So others would like to not use that. So that is true of this also. Then I'd like to talk about the Vartini and the Nyasa sections. So the Vartini is this one. So we went to the Madras ṭhāya and touched the Daivata also, though it is not specified in the notation. This reconstruction is based on how the melody flow seems to be. So we can always debate about that, but I have a feeling that more over and above what is there in the Lakshana, we can extend it a little also. So some of the observations about this ālāpa is that we notice a recursion, as I mentioned earlier, and these phrases are all short. We don't have dirgha swaras. They are all staccato phrases. And sometimes we have a common motif and it gradually increases in size. And the shadja is listed as the graha, amsha, and nyasa for this raga. Sorry, this is not shadja. I think this is a typo. This one had daivata as graha, amsha, nyasa. But daivata is not the swara from which we are starting the sections or even starting the ālāpa. So what is the meaning of that word graha? So that is, I think it's a legacy which has been taken over from one of the previous descriptions and just copied. And the ending swaras are adhered to in the most of the cases, though the starting swaras are not adhered to. And as I said, the melodic range can be slightly more than 2 octaves also. So there is another ālāpa which I looked at. I'm not going to play the sections of this ālāpa, but I'd just like to say that some of the observations of this ālāpa are also similar to what we saw in the Malahari ālāpa. That is, the number of sections need not be exactly the same as that is specified in the Lakshana. And also the number of ṭhānas in this ṭhāya is never as many as that is specified in the Lakshana. That is an observation which I have made. Number of ṭhānas always seems to be lesser. Of course, you can attribute it to scribal error or some missing palm leaves. You miss one palm leaf, you miss half the ālāpa. So things like that, but I have never seen any ṭhānas that adhere to the Lakshana, I mean the number of ṭhānas. And so similarly in Bhupala also we have the limits that have been specified by Govinda Dikshita, and I tried to look at the notation whether it was conforming, and I found that the ending notes are always adhered to. So the observations of this ālāpa are also very similar to those in Malahari. Now, if we look at the Lakshana and Sangeeta Sudha with the ālāpa notations, one thing is, as I said before, the colloquial names are used, and the number of sections is less in the notations as compared to the notations, the specification in the Sangeeta Sudha. I think probably what is specified in the Sangeeta Sudha is the maximum kind of number of sections, maximum number of ṭhānas. Maybe in Lakshya it was not mandatory to do everything that was prescribed in Sangeeta Sudha. And also, like I said, the commencing notes may not match, but the ending notes seem to match. And this Grahaswara issue, which I mentioned. So these are some of the observations. So if we now go back to the ālāpa of Grama Raga and the ālapti and the ālāpa of Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika and Sangeeta Sudha, we can make a few observations. One is that if we look at the size or the length of the ālāpa versus ālapti versus Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa is much more elaborate. Grama Raga ālāpa was a very short section. It was like just giving the Raga Lakshana. Raga ālapti is a little more elaborate. It had 4 swasthanas. But Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa is much more elaborate. And then if we think about whether it was improvised. Now, I feel that Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa, at least the notations that I have seen, are not improvised. They are like actual songs that have been sung. In fact, I will also talk about it a little bit, whether these were meant to be sung prior to the Gitas, Prabandhas, and so on. Whether they were meant to be sung prior to Suladis also, because I have found many of these ālāpa notations in Suladi manuscripts. So these were not improvised according to me, and according to Professor Ramanathan also. So then also that the key tonal points, see, we have the description of Graha, Amsha, Nyasa coming from the Gandharva period. But in ālapti, it is defined only in terms of Sthāyi, Tvayardha, Dviguna, etc. Though in the Raga Lakshana, you have the description of Graha, Amsha, Nyasa. When you're talking about the exposition, you're talking about it in terms of the ālapti. And Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa, we saw that Venkatamaki just says, you start from here, you go there, and so on. He gives the Graha, Amsha, Nyasa faithfully in the Raga Lakshana. But it doesn't seem to correlate to the actual descriptions that he's giving. So I wonder whether they're relevant at all in his period. And we have notations for Grama Raga and Bhasha melodies. We don't have notations for ālāpti. We only have templates, like I said, in the Vadana Krama. And we have templates for Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa in Sangita Sudha, and we have the actual notations in the Tanjavur manuscripts. And some of the interesting features are that Amsha is also defined as Jivaswara by Sharangadeva. So I think the concept of Jivaswara had come into the picture in the Deshi period. And I think it continues even today. So even in the 17th century, it was there. Of course, Govinda Dikshita doesn't mention it. I think Jivaswara is much more relevant for us today than talking about Amsha. I mean, don't they mean the same thing? I think the connotation has changed slightly. Jivaswara is the most important swara in the raga. And Professor Richard Widders writes that you can have more than one Jivaswara also in a raga. And in Hindustani music, they have the concept of Vadi, Samvadi. So those are very important tonal centers for them. So these are some of the things that we can observe. Then we come to ṭhāya. Then when we talk about ṭhāya, we see the word ṭhāya in Sangita Samaya Sara for the first time. And in Sangita Samaya Sara, ṭhāya stands for ṭhāya, which are nothing but melodic phrases. And he describes different types of ṭhāyas. But once we come to Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika, we find that it is defined as a melodic form, musical form, with specific sections. As we saw, ṭhāya is a much shorter form than an ālāpa. It is much more brief, and it only has one sthayi section, and then it has a makarani and a muktai. So that sthayi section has one bass note, and you have tanas built from that bass note. And ṭhāya usually follows an ālāpa notation in the Tanjavur manuscripts. But we do not have the prescriptions for ṭhāyas just like we have the prescriptions for ālāpas in Sangita Sudha. That is not there. So I looked at a ṭhāya of Malahari raga in the Tanjavur manuscript, B11575. I'd just like to play that. I have not played the full thing. We notice here that we have tam nam syllables. This is one thing which Dr. Premlata also talked about in her lecture, that we can either have only swaras or we can have nam tam syllables. So when we have such syllables, we can think about how to sing them and how they can be played on the Vina also. This was played on the Vina, but if we sing them, we can...
Tananna tanam nanam nananna tanam nanam tam nanam nanna.
So we see that the structure of the swaras and the structure of the syllables is kind of tallying. So, and when we play this on the Veena, we can think of the metus, how we can put the metus according to the structure of the syllables and the structure of the swaras. So this is something which she has elaborated on in her lecture. I don't want to go into that too much in detail. But this is a ṭhāya where we have swaras and tamnam syllables. We can have ṭhāyas without that also, only swaras. Similarly, in ālāpas, we can have both with nam tam syllables and swaras and without. So it is not, that is, we can have both. So we cannot say that ṭhāya is like tanam and it's not the case. Even in ālāpa, we can have nam tam syllables. So, and also there is a thinking that if we have only swaras, it is for instrument. And if we don't have, if we have nam tam syllables, it is for voice. I'm not very sure about that because I have seen a manuscript which had Suladi notations. And just before the Suladis, we had a lot of ālāpa and ṭhāya notations. Now, these ālāpa and ṭhāya notations had only swaras, no nam tam syllables. So, does it mean that they were meant for instrument and then you have, that is followed by a Suladi? How is the performance of a Suladi? Because traditionally we know that Suladis were composed by Haridasas and they were singing bards who had tamburi in one hand and chitike in the clappers in the other hand. So they were performing musicians, and they were primarily vocalists. So was there an instrumental ālāpa presentation before the Suladi? That seems unlikely, according to me. But it can also be said that just because there is no namtam, it doesn't mean it is not meant for voice. The other way also, right? So these are some of the questions which are there, which we have not been able to answer. The performance of many of these musical forms is a big question which we don't know much about. So probably we have to look at additional information, maybe from literature or other sources, to be able to understand that. So I also looked at another ṭhāya in Bhupalam. And coincidentally, after I prepared all my slides, I was listening to Dr. Premlata's lecture recording, and I found that she had also talked about the same ṭhāya, but I decided to retain it because this is from a different manuscript. And she has made an interesting point that immediately after this ṭhāya, she found another ṭhāya called Pakasarani ṭhāyam. And she is of the opinion that the Pakasarani ṭhāyam and this ṭhāyam are all like a cluster of compositions which have to be performed together. So maybe that is the case, but I'm not very sure how it all plays out, whether it's supposed to be performed together or they've just combine all the ṭhāyas pertaining to a certain raga and put them along with other songs of that raga and so on. There is one more point that I want to make about Pakasarani ṭhāya. See, if we look at the tuning system of given by Venkatamaki, as you know that in the early modern and even before that in the medieval period, in the 16th and 17th centuries, we had the Vina tuning systems given by many authors such as Ramamatya, Somanatha, and then Venkatamaki, Pandarika Vithala, all these people. So Venkatamaki has inherited some of the tuning systems from the earlier authors. If we look at that, if we look at the Shuddha Mela Veena, we have 4 strings, and he says that the 4th string is tuned to Madhya Madhyama, and the 3rd string is tuned to Madhya Shajja, 2nd string to Mandra Panchama, and 1st string to Mandra Shajja. Now, if we say Pakasarani ṭhāya, it means there is a method of playing this ṭhāya, Pakasarani method. So to describe that, let us understand this kind of tuning and the fretting that goes along with it. Now, I was looking at a book by Dr. Ranganayaki Iyengar. She has critically edited Somanatha's Raga Vibodha. And she says that when you talk about the 4th string, in the veena that is held upright, the 4th string is the one which is closest to the right hand of the player. So you can imagine that the veena is like this and the 4th string is closest to this hand. If you turn it this way, then the 4th string will be closest to me, to the player, not the farthest away. Because normally we tend to, when we say first string, we mean the string closest to me. In fact, today we call the sarani string also as the first string. But I think in this tuning, it is the 4th string which is closest to me and the 1st string is farthest away from me. So when we are talking about the 4th string, Shajja of the 4th string and the Rishabha and other swaras being played, it is the Mandra Shajja. And the thing is, Venkatamaki, what he describes is that on the Mandra Shajja, you can play Rishabha, Gandhara and so on, but beyond the Madhyama, don't play it on that string. That is the Sarani method. If you play it on that string, that is the Pakasarani method. Now, why should you play it either on that string or on the next string? What is the advantage? Both the methods, according to me, have their own advantages. If you play the frets closer to the Meru, then the swaras sound brighter. If you play all the swaras on the same string, as you go away from the Meru, the subsequent swaras are not so bright. That is one thing in favor of the Sarani method. And in favor of the Pakasarani method, we can say that it leads to continuity and flow. I mean, we think of the fretted venas of today. You can give better continuity and there is ease of playing if you play on the same string. So that is something which I thought about. I thought of sharing it since we have a mention of the Pakasarani ṭhāya. Then some of the ālāpa and ṭhāya notations, as I was saying, we see them coming together. You have an ālāpa notation, then a ṭhāya, then you have Gita, Prabandha, and sometimes Suladi also. So as I was saying, can we call them together Caturdaṇḍī compositions? Suladi is not mentioned by Venkatamaki. The Suladi composition is not mentioned, but it always comes in this set. So was it also part of the Caturdaṇḍī set? That is one question. Then the ṭhāya song notations are very similar to the ṭhāya section of an ālāpa. So what is the point in having an elaborate ālāpa notation immediately followed by a small ṭhāya notation? I mean, in terms of performance, isn't it boring or isn't it uninteresting to have a small section like that? Or was it not meant for performance? Was it meant for abhyasagana, to learn? We don't know the answer to that, but something to think about. And like I said, the pakasarani and sarani are seen in some notations and some they are not seen. So was it that if it is not seen, it is meant for voice, and then if it is seen, it is meant for Vina? And ālāpa and ṭhāya, like I said before, they appear to be pre-composed songs. They are not. They might be considered guidelines for improvisation or templates, but I don't think that they were documentation of actual improvised singing. So that is one thing that I wanted to say. Then when we come to the modern theoretical definitions of raga alapana, several authors have taken these words, Akshiptika Ragavardhini, and we have been reading those texts over the years, and we prepare for exams and we learn about the introductory section is Akshiptika and so on. And scholars such as Subbarama Dikshita himself, K.V. Srinivasa Iyengar, Chennakeshwaya, P. Sambamurthy, they have all used these terms. In fact, Subbarama Dikshita gives a very interesting, he has a very interesting take on Ragavardhanis. He says that the first Ragavardhani is sung in lower and middle registers, and there is a Vidari which is in a higher speed and a higher register. Then the second Ragavardhani is sung similar to the first one, but with more embellishments. And then it touches higher swaras. Then the third Ragavardhani is sung similar to the second one, but in a higher register. The fourth Ragavardhani, there is a fourth one, which is not there in Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika, which is also mentioned here. So he talks about that also. Then Professor Sambamurthy has a very interesting view. He says that Makarani is actually Tanam. Now, Makarani being equated to Tanam, I am somehow not able to, understand this, because Tanam is a totally different form. We cannot say that the Tanam is a conclusion of an Alapana. Tanam is another independent musical form that comes after Alapana. It's not necessary that after Alapana you have to sing Tanam. So I don't think that we can correlate Tanam to Alapana and call it Makarani. So there are two other authors who have looked at the Alapana by itself without this association, as it were. And one of them is Dr. M.B. Vedavalli, who was here with us until recently. I remember her coming to the Music Academy. And the other person is Dr. T. Vishwanathan. So both of them have described several stages of the Alapana. Dr. Vedavalli says that there is the first stage and then there is a second stage where you have development in the upper half of the middle register, the Madhyasthai, and then the Tarasthai. And then development in descent and conclusion. And Vishwanathan says something very similar, but he calls it 4 different stages. The first stage, second stage, third stage, and fourth stage. So can we correlate this to the Akshiptika Ragavardhini structure at all? At best, we can say there is an introduction, then there is a gradual build-up. We can probably try to correlate it to Sthai, but I'm not very convinced of that, because in the Sthai section, we have, when we look at Caturdaṇḍī Prakashika and Sangeeta Sudha, we have very specific descriptions of how the limits should be. You should not go above this swara and so on. And we looked at the examples of the actual tanams. They sound very, of course, we don't know the embellishments, but they sound very plain and simple as compared to the complexity that is seen today. So I have been arguing about it with my students for some time, but I am not convinced of this. And at the end, we have a concluding section. We can probably call it a muktai or whatever. But to me, it seems one glaring difference is that there is no Ragavardhini. Immediately after introducing the raga, we get into the step. We park ourselves on a note and then we start building phrases around it. So there is no Ragavardhini at all. So I'd now like to summarize my findings. The Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa is structurally different from the ālāpa of the Grama raga and Bhasha and other melodies, as well as the raga ālapti, and its length, the number of sections, and also the range, the octave registers. And the meaning and significance of the raga lakshana features such as graha, amsha, nyasa, they have changed a lot from the marga ragas to the deshi ragas and to the modern period also. And we have things like jiva swara, which is more relevant, I feel. And we have, in ālapti, we have the sthai note and the dvayardha and dviguna and all that. And in Sangeeta Sudha and even in other texts which I have not mentioned today, we see the legacy of mentioning the graha swara. And many times graha, amsha, nyasa is the same. So musically, I don't understand whether it has any significance. And then in a large number of notations that I have seen in ālāpa and ṭhāya and Tanjavur manuscripts, they have some conformance with the Lakshana of Sangeeta Sudha, and they seem to portray pre-composed songs. And as I said before, there have been attempts to correlate the Akshiptika Ragavardhani structure to modern Alapana, but I feel that there are a lot of gaps. And there are many differences between the modern Alapana and the Akshiptika Ragavardhani structure that we see in the Caturdaṇḍī, Prakashika and Sangeeta Sudha. And this whole study, I feel, can lead us to think about how raga evolution itself has happened. Because you start from Grama ragas, which were, specific melodies. They were like tunes. Probably these were the tunes that were taken from drama, as Professor Ramanathan puts it. And so they were just meant to give the lakshana of the raga. From there you have, they developed gradually to become a melodic source. And then in the Deshi period, you see that they are the musical modes which can be used for not only composition and classification, but also improvisation. So that has led us to the ragas of the modern period, where you have, ragas are not only ways of classifying musical songs, musical compositions, but they are also the material with which you can improvise and compose new types of songs. So before I close, I just wanted to share this one thing with all of you. This is a song which you must have heard hundreds of times, but I was thinking about the sthāya structure, and I felt that the composer has come up with he has a bass note and he has an ending note. And he has followed this structure in 3 of the charanas. So let me play that for you. You start from Ga. So that was Vidwan Semmangudi Srinivasa Iyer. And even in the...
Can you play the second one too?
Yes, yes. So he has to go up to Sa. So this is followed in, sorry?
This is a very interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, I was just listening to the song and thinking about ālāpa, and then I realized, it is matching the structure. No, this is followed only in Gandhara, Madhyama, Panchama, Daivata, Nishada, not in Shajja.
Have you checked Edukula Kambuji?
Edukula Kambuji doesn't have this. Rave also doesn't have this.
Rave, we'll leave Rave aside.
No, Edukula Kambuji also no. Only in Bhairavi and only for these charanas, not for the Madhya Sai Shajja and the Madhya Sai Rishabha. Only for these. You have to also think of practical difficulties, whether he can go up to that swara. But I thought it was a very beautiful thing which Shama Shastri has done, that he has taken a bass note and he has kept himself restricted up to only 4 notes above it. So, I mean, these are some of the things that, so though it is not there in ālāpana, it's there in composition. So with that, I come to the end of this lecture. So I would like to thank Professor Dr. N. Ramanathan sir, who has continuously helped me to clear my doubts, and who have been consulting him. And I feel that I have not done justice to whatever he has tried to teach me, but I'm very grateful for all the inputs. And my students, Dr. Karthik and Dr. Srilata, who are here today, lot of umpteen discussions with them about modern ālāpana, about Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa, and so on. And also Sugnandani and my other PhD student, Vipanchi Raghuram, who has helped me with this PPT, and Vignesh, who's right here, who helped me at the very critical time by lending me his laptop so that it doesn't become a damn squib. So, and this is some select bibliography of some of the manuscripts and other sources that I referred to. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Arathi Rao. Members of the experts committee, mic please. Sangeeta Kala Acharya, Dr. Rita Rajan.
Very interesting, scholarly, and thought-provoking.
Thank you very much.
Sarama. You said about Malahari and the
Bhupalam.
other raga,
Bhupalam.
raga.
Yeah.
Probably in those times, இதெல்லாம் ஆலாபனை பண்ணியிருந்தாங்க. இப்போ இருக்கிற நம்ம பாடலாங்கள்லாம் அப்போ அங்கே கொடுத்துருக்கா?
Bhairavi is there. There are many other ragas. There are Bhairavi, Riti Gaula. I think I was trying to find ragas where you have a description in Sangeeta Sudha and also notations, because there are many notations which don't have a description in Sangeeta Sudha also. And there are some rare ragas like Ardhadeshi, Gunda Kriya, and of course you have Gaula, Nata, Varali, all these ragas also, yes.
இப்போல்லாம் நம்ம மலஹரி ராகத்துக்கு ஆலாபனை பண்ணதில்லை, பூபாலத்துக்கும் பண்ணதில்லை.
Yes, yes.
So I was just wondering,
yes,
the Bhairavi and மாதிரி இருந்தானா probably we will be able to,
yes,
I mean,
correlate.
Yes.
Yeah. But Bhairavi, the Bhairavi of that time is not the Bhairavi of today. That is another. It is like Nata Bhairavi.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Even then.
Yeah.
இது பண்ணலாமே. நிறைய பைரவியில் கூட ஸ்ரீனிவாஸ் ஐயர் யூஸ் டு சே கொலுவை நாடே கோலோவை அப்படி தான் முதல்ல இருந்தது சொல்லியிருக்கேன். நம்ம அதை பின்னாடி மாற்றிட்டான்னு சொல்லியிருக்கோம். ஸோ அட்லீஸ்ட் we can just try to find out what were the changes to our best knowledge that happened during the course of time.
Yeah. Actually, that's a very interesting thing. But here I wanted to focus not on the raga lakshana, but the structure itself, more on the structure and less on the actual raga lakshanas, because raga lakshanas are very tricky to understand, because the descriptions also may not fully give the picture. And the biggest problem for us is we cannot reproduce the gamakas.
Yes.
And if we try to present it without gamakas, it sounds like a very skeletal way of putting it. So that is one problem,
Because studying the manuscripts,
yes,
it is a special qualification. நல்லா பாடலாம் நம்ம இது பண்ணலாம், பாடிண்டு ஓரளவு இதையும் புரிஞ்சுக்கணுன்னா பீப்புள் லைக் அஸ் தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்கு. இப்போ நீங்கள் வந்து பைரவி அந்த மாதிரி ராகம் எடுத்துருந்தான்னா ஓரளவு இப்போ நம்ம எப்படி பாடின்னு இருக்கோம், இது அப்போ எப்படி இருந்திருக்கு, இந்த மாதிரி டு சம் எக்ஸ்டென்ட் அது வந்து தெரிஞ்சுக்கணும்.
Sure, thank you. I will think about it. And
practicing musician,
sure,
or அது ஒரு இன்பிட்வீனாக இருக்கிறோம், இப்படி இல்லை அப்படி இருக்கும். எல்லாருக்குமே ஓரளவு இது சாஸ்திரமும் தெரியணும், சாஸ்திரம் தெரிஞ்ச வழக்கம் இதுவும்.
Yes,
there should be some knowledge of Lakshya.
Thank you so much. I will work on it. Thank you.
Sangeeta Kala Acharya, Dr. R.S. Jayalakshmi.
நமஸ்காரம் எல்லாருக்கும். ரொம்ப நல்லா பண்ண மாருதி. அதாவது நம்ம பரம்பரை சொல்கிறோம் இல்லையா, பாட்டு பாடுறதுக்கு பரம்பரை மாதிரி தியரிக்கு ஒரு பரம்பரை, ராமநாத் சார் அந்த மாதிரி. ஸோ ஒரு ட்ரெடிஷன் வந்துருக்கு, அது ரொம்ப முக்கியம். அதனால் ஐ எம் வெரி கிளாட் அதை முதல்ல பார்க்குறதுக்கு. அப்புறம் இந்த காத்திர தண்டி ஜந்திர தண்டின்லாம் சொல்லியிருக்கனால இன்ஸ்ட்ருமெண்ட்டுக்கும் வோக்கலுக்கும் வித்தியாசமாக இருந்திருக்குங்கிறது நமக்கு தெரியுது இல்லையா? அது
Dr. Sita writes about Jantra Dandi and Gatra Dandi. It is, I have not found these in any of the notations, but like Dr. Premlata mentioned, she has found it in one or two manuscripts. So Jantra Dandi.
பட் இந்த வாசுதேவாச்சார சாஸ்திரியோட புக்கில்
Yes, he has given. He has given. In Raga, ālāpa and time it is there. But again, which is the source manuscript? That is not specified. So I would like to look at the source manuscript and try to understand. Of course, it is very obvious that Jantra Dandi refers to instrument and Gatra Dandi refers to voice. But that is fine if it is specified that way. But if you say Pakasarani and Sarani, is it always meant for instrument? I'm not sure. Maybe it was meant for both. That is my doubt. Or if nothing is specified, then does it mean you have to only sing it, or is it meant for both? That was my question.
ஏன்னா இப்போ வந்து சதுர்தண்டி சொல்கிறச்சே அவர் வந்து இந்த டாயாஸை வந்து இவர் அந்த அவர் பேர் மறந்து போயிடுது எனக்கு, தானப்பா அவர் வாசிப்பார் அப்படின்னு தான் கொடுத்துருக்காரு, பாடுவார்னு கொடுக்கல. பாடுவார்னு கொடுக்கல, வீணையில் வாசிப்பார்னு தான் கொடுத்துருக்கா. So maybe
yes, but at the other reference on ṭhāyas is also that there is a reference by Prasanna Venkata Dasa for Purandara Dasa, which are all the compositions that he has composed. He has composed Geeta, Prabandha, ṭhāya, Suladi, Devarnama. They don't talk about ālāpa. So if he composed ṭhāyas, was he playing them? Was he singing them? That is, I mean, maybe it is an older period, I agree. When we talk about Tanappa, it may be more recent. So there may be developments there also, that initially it was a vocal composition and then it has evolved into an instrumental composition and so on.
Thank you, ma.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Ramakausalya.
டைம் வந்து மெட்ராஸ் யூனிவர்சிட்டி சிலபஸில் இருந்தது நாங்கள் படிக்கும்பொழுது. விஸ்வநாதன் கூட ஒரு நிறைய பார்த்துருக்க டாயங்களை. அது எங்களுக்கு தானம் மாதிரி தான் வாசிக்கணும் அப்படின்னு எங்களுக்கு சொல்லி கொடுத்துருந்தா. அது வந்து இன்ஸ்ட்ருமெண்ட்டுக்கானது தான் அது. அதில் வந்து தானம் இப்போ எப்படி தானம் வாசிக்கிறோமோ அதை போல் தான் அதையும் அப்படின்னு நாட்டையெல்லாம் இருந்தது. அதில் எங்களுக்கு நாட்டையெல்லாம் சொல்லி கொடுத்ததில்ல. அதனால் இது இட் இஸ் நாட் ஃபார் வோக்கல், இட் இஸ் ஃபார் இன்ஸ்ட்ருமெண்ட்னு சொன்னாங்க.
மேபி
அப்போல்லாம் வந்து இந்த மாதிரிலாம் ரிசர்ச்லாம் தெரியாது, இதெல்லாம் அப்படிலாம் பார்த்து ஒன்றும் பண்ணலை அப்போல்லாம். அதில் இருந்தது அப்படியே அவர் கொடுத்துருந்தார், விஸ்வநாதன் கொடுத்துருந்தார். இப்படிலாம் நீங்கள் சொன்னபடி இந்த சாஸ்திரத்துக்கு ஒரு ட்ரெடிஷன், அதுக்கு ஒரு பரம்பரையெல்லாம் இருந்திருக்குன்னு தெரியுது. நமக்கு ஒன்றும் தெரியல அப்போ, சம் 50-60 இயர்ஸ் பேக் அதெல்லாம் ஒன்றும் தெரியாது. அவர் கொடுத்துருந்தா அதை நாங்கள் போய் வாசித்தோம். ஆனால் வாத்தியார் சொன்னது என்னென்னா, அது வந்து இன்ஸ்ட்ருமெண்ட்டுக்காக தான், அது தானம் மாதிரி தான் அதை வந்து வாசிக்கணும், அது அந்த ராகங்களை தெரிஞ்சுக்கிறதுக்காக. அது
quite possible. It might have been at some period, it might have been only an instrumental composition also.
அது மட்டும் இல்லை, அதில் வந்து இதெல்லாம் எங்கே மந்திரஸ் தாயா, மத்தியஸ் தாயா, தாராஸ் தாயாலாம் தெரியாது, நம்மளே யூகிச்சுக்கணும், அவ்வளோதான். அதை பார்த்து அப்படி தான். அதனால் எங்களுக்கு தானமாக தான் நாங்கள் நிறைய டாயங்களை வாசிச்சிருக்கோம். அது என்ன சொல்லுவான்னா, ராகங்களை தானம் வாசிக்க உபயோகமாக இருக்கும். ஒன்று, இந்த ராகங்களுடைய ரேஞ்சை புரிஞ்சுக்க உபயோகமாக இருக்கும், காம்பினேஷன் புரிஞ்சுக்க உபயோகமாக இருக்கும், ராகங்களை தெரிஞ்சுக்கலாம் அப்படின்னு தான் எங்களுக்கு சொன்னால். அது இவ்வளவுலாம் அப்போல்லாம் தெரியல எங்களுக்கு, அதெல்லாம் தெரியல.
But was there a bass note and the structure was like this, or
ஸ்ட்ரக்சராக இருக்கும், அப்படியே இருக்கும். நம்மளாவே யூகிச்சுன்னு இது கீழே மேலே ஆரம்பிச்சிருந்த பார்த்து ஓஹோ இது கீழே மத்திய சாலை ஆரம்பிச்சுக்கணுமாக்கோ நாங்களாவே நினச்சிப்போம், அவ்வளோதான். நிறைய கொத்தா நிறையா இருக்கும் எங்களுக்கு எல்லா ராகத்துலையும். அப்போல்லாம் இப்படிலாம் யோசிச்சு பார்த்தது இல்லை, கம்பேர் பண்ணி பார்த்தது இல்லை. இப்போ தான் அதில் இவ்வளோ இருக்குதுலாம் தெரியுது. தேங்க்யூ. வெறும் அதை தானம் மாதிரி வாசிப்போம், அவ்வளோதான். எல்லாத்துக்கும் நிஜமாக முதல்ல நாட்டை தான் ஆரம்பித்தோம் ஃபஸ்ட்டு. அதை நாட்டை தான் சொல்லி கொடுத்தேன் ஃபஸ்ட்டு. ஆனால் அம்மா அது தானம் மாதிரி வாசிக்கோங்க அப்படின்பா, அதை வச்சு கையில் கொடுத்துட்டோம். தானம் மாதிரி எங்களுக்கு தெரிஞ்ச மாதிரி தானம் மாதிரி வாசிச்சுட்டு இருந்தோம், அவ்வளோதான். இல்லை யாருக்குமே பற்றி ரொம்ப நாலஞ்சு எங்களுக்கு கிடையாது. 4 தாயம் அனுபவம் சிலபஸில் இருந்தது. சிலபஸில் 4 டைம் போட்டிருந்தது. ஆனால் 4 டைமும் வந்து கம்பல்சரியாக ஏதோ 4 ராகத்தில். அது எப்படி பாடம் பண்ணுறது, வண்டை காஞ்சி போய்டும். அதை பாடம்லாம் பண்ண முடியாது, ஆனால் பாடம் பண்ணி ஆகணும். எப்படி பாடம் பண்ண தெரியும், இவ்வளோ பெருசு கொத்தா இவ்வளோ சொரங்கள் போட்டிருக்கோம், காம்பினேஷன் எப்படி பாடம் பண்ண தெரியாமல் நடுப்பு எங்கள் மனோதரம் படிலாம் வாசிட்டு இதுதான் அதில் இருந்ததுன்னு சொல்லிவிடுவோம். பொய் தான் அதெல்லாம்.
Thank you, Dr. Ramakausalya. Thank you. Dr. Naresh Kirti has a question.
In the notations for some of the prabandhas, I think if I remember right, in the Kaivada Prabandha in Narayana, there is a khandika called the ālāpa khanda. Do you think, looking at the notation for ālāpa khandas, which, like you're saying, we have to make this distinction between the ālāpas, the ālapti, and now I'm adding another element of
ālāpa khanda.
Yes.
Yeah, even in you mean there are akara passages or there is iya passages.
That's right.
You find those in suladis also.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I'm just saying how do you crunch all of these different ālāpa/ālaptis together? Because if you want to look at the structure, does that get excluded from your analysis? So because you're talking about a transformation of something that we are familiar with as an impromptu expository form to a preset expository form. Is that a correct characterization?
Correct. Yes.
Because we are taking what we know as the improvised alapana that we are familiar with, but then in certain forms, it is being converted or it's being transformed into a preset form that is either used for practice or used as part of performance. So do you think that this is the same kind of datum that you would study the ālāpa khanda and then study it in the same way as you study the notations of the āyitams or the ālāpas?
See, I did not, I was aware of these ālāpa khandas, but I did not take up tala-bound compositions in particular. In fact, if for that matter, we have Rupaka Alapti also in the earlier period. That is also improvisation. But I thought I will first look at only non-tala-bound compositions. Because the tala-bound compositions, there is the improvisation has some influence or some restriction because of the composition itself. So I thought that I would first look at forms which are free of totally free of lyrics or tala or any other kind of such parameters, and then try to see where we are going. But I think further down the line, probably I should extend my study to these also. In fact, if you look at Professor Vidas's book, he has looked at Akshiptika and other songs also, in addition to the ālāpa and rupaka of the Grama Raga Bhasha period. So similarly, in the Raga Alapti period, we can also look at Rupaka Alapti. And then when we look at Caturdaṇḍī ālāpa, we should also look at Prabandhas to see whether these sections, whether they portray how improvisation is to be done in that. This is just the first cut of the first attempt of this study, and I think we should expand this study to those forms also.
A small point.
Naresh,
okay,
others,
sure.
if
Thank
you don't
you.
mind.
Yes.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you. Dr. Srilata?
Namaste, madam. I wanted to ask you about this particular phrase I found. I think I mentioned this to you, perhaps, that we were just discussing whether this Gatradaṇḍī and Jhantradaṇḍī. So there is a clue in one of the manuscripts, if I remember, it's 11573, in a very unlikely place, that is the Anukramanika or the index, where it says Gatra Vidham and Jhantra Vidham. So basically, we do not have to worry about whether there is a Tana syllables for the Sahitya, or whether simply the swaras are given for ālāpa and ṭhāya. We could just have a bunch of swaras. But then this gave me the understanding.
Okay.
I don't know if it requires.
You
may
can,
say this
what
requires
you're
a
trying
paper.
to say is that
Yes.
this the same composition can be presented in both the ways.
No, that's not what I'm saying. If it says ālāpa, it has to be done in the Gatra Vidham. That is
Okay.
With
The
a
voice.
little, like a voice, perhaps with less meter. And
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
Yes.
The Gatra Vidham is the Gayaki style,
Yes,
as
it's
so to
not.
speak.
I do not think it refers to voice per se. It requires.
Yeah, the way, the style of
Yes.
presentation. Yeah,
Or
like we
maybe you
have
can sing
in Vina and in sitar, more so in sitar. I think we have the Gayaki
Yes.
way of
Are you
doing.
inferring a fluidity by any chance in your
Yes,
Yes, yes.
So there is a fluidity, and perhaps it allows for pauses and stuff
Yeah.
which cannot be really notated. So we have an outline of a lot of notations. We have phrases, but how do you differentiate between a ṭhāya and ālāpa? And this was the clue I found.
Yeah, that's a very good input. Let me
Yes,
think
madam.
about it. Yeah.
So that is
because
one thing.
yeah, sure.
And regarding this question you asked about ālāpa khanda in the Prabandhas, it was part of my PhD research, as you're aware. And the way I interpreted the ālāpa khanda was precisely in this fashion, because we do have an outline of a notation which tells us it's not all improvised. The tune is given. The only difference is that you can take a little bit of liberty
and
maybe with the gamakas, with the how well you present it, and you stop the tala at that point,
right?
Because the talas do not match the tala of the prabandha in these particular ālāpa khandas, and we found quite a few ālāpa khandas in the prabandhas. We only have SSPs, Narayana Gowda as an example today, but in the manuscripts we
quite
found,
a few are there, yes.
And also another term that's used is tala vanchana, that is where some sections are sung without tala. So that particular feature is completely absent from today's compositions. We find portions of the compositions
which are not,
where you stop the thing
which
and
are not bound by
you
tala.
sang a part of it. So thank you very much, and I hope
you,
additional inputs are interesting.
I'm amazed that you remember the manuscript number. That gasp from my side was,
she has been memorizing them for 5 years.
Vidushi Aishwarya Shankar, you had a question, and then we will pass it on to the side.
So 2 quick questions. Out of the manuscripts which you looked for, did you ever come across a ṭhāya and Natanarayani?
ṭhāya in Natanarayani, no, I don't remember that. But I can just check my index and tell you.
Okay, and the second thing was you told that Samamurthy sir had come to a conclusion that Makarani na Thanam abdina. So now there's in Oriental music, we have one notation for, which says that it's a Thanam notation for Natanarayani.
Okay.
And that specific notation is not even transliterated to the European notation.
Okay.
It is in Telugu script.
I see.
And it mentions all the sections which have been described
for a
in the Caturdaṇḍī period, as also given by Subramanian Dikshitar, while he talks about the Kataka Tanas and all. So we find these all mentions of these sections and notations for that, Makarani, Muktai, everything.
I see.
So under the notation heading says that it's Thanam for Natanarayani, and we find Makarani there.
Oh, okay. So do you find the ṭhāya notation, or do you find ālāpa? I mean, sections for pertaining to ṭhāya or sections pertaining to ālāpa?
The sections look to be pertaining to the ṭhāya only, but have to look deeper into
okay, that's very interesting. Thanks for that input. I would like to get that reference from you, and
because it says Thana notation and Makarani and everything comes into
that's a very interesting input.
Because in SSP we don't find that Thanam with all those sections.
Okay, yeah, we don't. In SSP, the Thanam is very different. Out of curiosity, I looked at that, but that doesn't seem to have this recursive
these
structure.
Sections are not mentioned actually in the notation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aishwarya. I now pass on the mic to Sangeeta Kalanidhi designate Vidwan Shri T.M. Krishna for his summing up.
After such a lecture, one has to speak with great trepidation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I probably have more questions than observations. You spoke about Deshi period and you spoke about Sangeeta Ratnakara. What about the ālāpanam? As in the whole idea of the ālāpa and the ālāpti. The idea of Kallinatha giving the Devadatta example of the idea that one is composed, one is improv. The existence of both together.
Yes.
What about that? Where does that come in this whole conversation?
See, in Sangeeta Ratnakara, he describes Grama Raga ālāpas.
Yes.
And he also talks about the ālapti of the Deshi Ragas.
But there is an analogy that Kallinatha gives, no? About Devata coming into the court and you recognize him until he sits down. But once he sits down, you don't know who he is. But when he stands up to speak, you again recognize him, which is a fascinating analogy, no?
Yeah, in fact, Professor Satyanarayana says ālapti is concealment. And ālāpa is
exactly. That's
revealing.
My whole idea, that revealing and concealment, I thought is a... I mean, differentiating it in that manner is, I thought, quite an interesting thing to differentiate. So, seems like improvisation is more concealment and what is not improv seems to be revealing.
You conceal and then you reveal. In fact, Professor Vidas makes a comment that when you want to showcase a prominent note, you sing several sancharas which don't include that note, and then you rest on it, and then it becomes very prominent.
I think that's true of all art in some ways. Even visual art, you find something is concealed so that your attention is drawn. The other thing is about octave that you were mentioning, about the ālāpas. No, but when you look at the Sangeeta Sampradaya tradition, look at some of the Gitas, they go up to Atitarasthai.
Yes.
And even Ati Mandarasthai. So I'm wondering if we were going to take those notations to be fairly
accurate.
I mean, of course, accurate. Isn't there a mismatch in terms of octave range?
No, what do you mean by mismatch? You mean to say that these Gitas were composed in the 17th, 18th century?
No, I don't know. I'm asking in terms of if we were going to say the ālāpas and ṭhāyas were within 1.5 octaves.
No, the specification is 1.5. I mean, rather 1 and 3/4.
Okay.
That is what Sangeeta Sudha says. If you literally take his words as you start from Madhyasthai, end in Tara Daivata or Tara Nishada. But as I said, if you look at the actual notations, we were going into the mandra.
So are you also in Atitarasthai?
Atitarasthai, I have not been able to reconstruct. See, the reconstruction is also a tricky thing because I have reconstructed it based on my understanding of the melodic flow. You can argue that, you know, you can go higher. Why are you going down? Because that's the natural tendency for us. We all function in about 2.5 octaves. We cannot think of going to Atitarasthai.
Because when we try to sing some of those gitas, it's a struggle.
Yes, it's a struggle.
The smarter thing is to reduce a shruti and sing it.
Yes,
so you can sing it.
Yes.
So that's
it
why
could very well be that the actual octave ranges were even more.
That's my
question.
question.
There could be three octaves.
That was my question. So could it have been more? That was my question to you.
Yes.
Then even again, it's a question of recreation, right? When you recreate the ālāpa, there's a kala pramana choice that is happening.
Yes.
So when you played, for example, Malahari. Now, how does one make that kala pramana choice?
It is totally subjective.
Because, that is exactly. Yeah. So in terms of when we discuss, for your point of fluidity, for example, right? Yeah. And a lot of it, and movement of the swaras. And interestingly, I found a lot of janta.
Yes, there is a lot
in
of
the
janta.
ālāpa example.
Yes,
so that is also quite fascinating because we don't usually sing so much janta.
Sure.
So suppose we were going to slow that down. Will it still be a janta?
It will still be...
Will it sound like a janta in today's context?
Let me
put it that way.
No, it will not. I mean, the way of playing or the way of singing will not sound like a janta in today's context. Yes. So, but, you know, the repetition of the swara implies that, Professor Vidas writes, that the repetition of the swara implies that it's an important swara. When you say that bahutva, as we say, bahutva is not only that you take the total notation and it occurs 27 times. It's not like that. If it is getting repeated, it is a very prominent swara. So that is where the bahutva comes in.
I'm not disagreeing with the prominence. I'm just saying in terms of the sound. Yeah. The moment you increase the space,
it will sound different.
So the whole melodic movement, if we are of course trying to presuppose something, will be different.
Yes, in fact,
So then could that have also been, I mean, for example, ṭhāya and ālāpa, of course, we don't know the functionality of ṭhāya. Yeah. Could that have been also an element that we are unable to decipher in terms of kala pramana is my question to you.
So you're saying that an ālāpa probably, can we think that it is a slower kind of exposition?
This is again completely...
probably that could be one of the factors.
Because we are not able to find a difference, for example. So could a kala pramana been one of the differentiating factors? Is just a thought.
Could be.
I found one thing very interesting about Malahari. Is this repetition of Risa da Sasa.
Yes.
Padumanaba today is Risa da Sasa. Which I thought was quite an interesting motive.
Yes.
So which was an interesting motive to this whole question of Anibadha, Nibadha. And it's very obvious from the notation, looks like a Nibadha form. And you suggest that it becomes Anibadha at some point of time. But could the opposite also happen? Because if the suggestion of a form is there in the Sangeeta Sudha and Chaturdaṇḍī Prakashika in a descriptive manner, and then you have a time lag between that and probably the notations of some time, possibly. Could it have the reverse happened is my other question. Could it have become, because we also find in practice today, through period of time, certain things become crystallized.
Yes.
Even in our Adibadha forms.
Yes.
So you find that after a point, Virutam, even I was telling somebody, even Virutam today sometimes fixed.
Yes.
Or Shlokam Bharata, almost the same Sangatis come.
Yes.
So through practice, or even in Western music, you look cadences, for example. Many times it becomes fixed after a point of time. So could the inverse also have happened? Is my curiosity question.
So are you saying that Lakshya comes first and Lakshana follows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I'm also saying that that something that may have been slightly freer in a descriptive nature because of practice and repetition and even popularity for that matter.
Right. So you make those, you crystallize those rules based on what is being done.
And could it have become Nibadha is my question.
Quite possible, yes.
That was...
Yes.
Yeah, because it is because in practice we see that happening very often.
Yes.
And I don't think human nature changes by much. So, so that was my other suggestion. And this... I thought your point on Abhyasa Gana was very interesting. What is Abhyasa Gana and what is stage is a fascinating question. I know Dr. Ramanathan has very strong opinions on it and he says, Kirtana koda kachirla paadamanu oru question abdinu.
Yes.
In fact, we had a huge argument. He said, Kirtanam is Abhyasagana. When you perform, you sing only raga, ālāpana, pallavi.
It was not meant for the concert.
Is it meant for the concert? Is an interesting question. So, how does something become abhyasam?
See,
how does something become
we have
performative?
notations of chittatanas.
Yes.
We have notations of swarakalpana. So, all that, what does it mean? Does it mean that we have to memorize those and present them in a concert? They are guidelines for us to understand and learn those musical forms. So, that is abhyasagana.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you present in a concert, it is no longer, I mean, you don't present the same thing, right?
And we do know to some extent that, I mean, comparing even in the 19th century, the main part of performance was basically ālāpana and tānam, etc. So the other thing that I think was very important is this question of reuse of terminologies, you know, and the terminologies keep coming back through time. And that is one of the reasons we struggle with finding new meanings for it every time. Or trying to correlate an old term in today's terms. Everybody has done it. I mean, every scholar has done it.
Especially the commentators.
Yes, they've all done it. So that was, I think, important. Also for us in today's context, because we tend to do it. Textbooks also provide it. So I think that was important. But I had one doubt I also want to ask you. You did somewhere in the beginning of your lecture talk about connections to the past.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a connection being made in somewhat of a linear fashion from the Sangeeta Ratnakara.
Connection to what?
To ālāpa, ālāpti.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether that is possible. Is a conceptual point. Because I'm just saying, again, are we making a jump over there? Is my question to you.
Well, I mean, we are not, I was not trying to say that there is a connection. I was just trying to see if there is any connection. Okay. See, the provocation for this, let me tell you, because I've heard people say, you know, the krama of ālāpana is given in Sangeeta Ratnakara, modern ālāpana. You know, I find such statements to be very sweeping, and I feel without even knowing what those forms were, if we think that we can correlate everything that we are doing now to the previous forms, it is, you know, it's too much.
It's exactly what I'm asking, because we're also looking at different regions at some level.
Yes, different regions, different traditions, different traditions.
Different regions, different traditions. So also textual traditions, like we have said, also reuse terms.
Yes.
So considering how messy
no, I was not trying to establish a connection. I was only trying to look at the various characteristics of each of the traditions and each of the musical forms and say that they are different.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, thank you very much for. Finally, I want to say one thing. This is a generic point. When you listen to a lecture like yours, you're reminded of what a musicological process is. The intellectual process of how does one look at something. Many years ago, at a panel discussion, Rumila Thapar had talked about the historical process on how does one look at a manuscript, look at history, how does one cross-refer and the whole process. So thank you so much for reminding us of all that is required to, you know, even think, read, and decipher and enriching our morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Arathi Rao, as always. Wonderful.
Thank you.
We'll draw the curtains to prepare the stage for the second presentation by Dr. Neena Prasad.